We're at 10 a.m., so I think we can go ahead and get started here. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The C-Suite Chat, Early Adoption of GenAI for Software Products. We have our speakers here, Frank Moyer, CTO from Kobiton, and Jeff Scott, SVP of Delivery at KMS Technology. We're excited to have you here this morning, and we'll get started shortly. But first, I'm going to walk through a few items before we begin. So first and foremost, this webinar is part of a larger generative AI series from KMS Technology. In this series, we've gathered great insights from early adopters and tech leaders like Frank to better understand how to harness GenAI effectively. Everything's changing really quickly, and our goal is to learn with you and help you get the most value out of this technology. And now we can move on to the agenda. So we're going to start with a few housekeeping items here, and then we'll move on to the speaker introductions. Jeff is going to take us through a few slides just to understand the foundation of generative AI, and then we'll hear directly from Frank in the early adopter Q&A. At the end, we'll take questions from the audience, and then we'll wrap up so you can enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. And now we'll go ahead and get started with the housekeeping items. All right, so first we're going to start with an icebreaker poll. You should see that pop up on your screen now. We'd love to hear from you. This is just an example to give you the gist of how the polls will work throughout the webinar. We'll have a few pop up during relevant topics. We want to learn from you and understand where you are in your GenAI journey. Additionally, at the end of the webinar, we will have a survey so we can hear from you how everything went and get some feedback so that we can keep improving this series. Other items, we will be taking questions from the audience during this webinar. We will save them for the end, just as you saw on the agenda previously. You can submit your questions in the Zoom Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd prefer, you can also submit them anonymously. If you have any questions about the logistics of the webinar, you can add them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll do my best to assist you if you're having any trouble. And then, as I mentioned before, we will take all the questions at the end. If there are any that we aren't able to get to, we will reach out after the webinar. Speaking of which, for outreach and follow-ups, we will send an email after the webinar with this recording, so you will always have access to it. In addition, we'll be sending additional resources on generative AI, including some of the materials we put together in our larger GenAI series. We will also have some tools and technologies that Frank has curated that he recommends if you're starting your journey on generative AI and want to know where to get started and what to look for. I think that's all we have for today. So I'm going to go off camera. Please keep an eye out for the polls, and I'm going to hand it over to Jeff for introductions.
Thanks, Addie. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jeff Scott. I'm the SVP of Global Delivery for KMS Technology. We'll soon be celebrating our 15th year of business in providing software solutions for our clients and partners around the world, leveraging offshore, nearshore, and U.S.-based engineering and testing teams. I'm proud to have been part of this great organization for the last 5 years, and I'm really excited about the future of KMS as we enter this new era of working with generative AI-assisted tooling and products. I've seen the benefits of this technology both personally and professionally, and I'm leading several efforts at KMS to ensure that our teams are well prepared to not only utilize these tools, but to guide and consult our clients on how best to integrate generative AI into their SDLC practices and their product roadmaps to both improve efficiencies and elevate their brand in the eyes of their customers. Frank?
Thank you, Jeff. I'm Frank Moyer. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Kobiton. Kobiton has a mobile testing platform that allows developers and testers to get access to real devices, and we layer on top artificial intelligence to make the developers and testers increase their productivity and the quality in order to deliver excellent mobile experiences to their users. Back to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank. So just to get started here, AI is not new, and we all know that. But the attention that it's been getting recently is unprecedented in its long and storied history, going back as far as the mid-1950s when the first AI-focused research workshops began. Looking back, I really think that we're going to see a key turning point was the culmination of multiple language and image recognition capabilities in AI systems, improving to perform better than humans in the late 2019s and 2020s. Since then, the pace of change and innovation picked up rapidly, and the development of transformer models or transformers and large language models took center stage, culminating in what we see today with the viral spread of generative AI across the globe. In our research at KMS Technology, we focus both internally at our own customer base and at the market as a whole. We're seeing some interesting trends in terms of early adoption that I'd like to spend some time talking with you about today before we bring in our featured guest, Frank, to share some of his early adoption journey. Our own surveys reflect widespread awareness and early stage adoption, which is not likely a huge surprise to anyone on this webinar. The pace of actual adoption and integration of generative AI-based capabilities does vary widely depending upon the risk tolerance and the overall AI maturity level of the companies that we're talking with. This is also reflected by a variety of other sources. Go ahead to the next slide, please, including a recent study by McKinsey. A third of all respondents to their survey say their organization is already regularly using generative AI in at least one function. Continued investment and board level attention to generative AI is very, very common. And the areas of marketing and sales, production and service development, customer care and back office support are among the prime targets, not the only targets, but the prime targets for using this technology. As we dig a little deeper, companies that they classify as, we'll call them high performers, or those with at least 20% of their earnings directly attributed to AI adoption, bring a higher level of AI maturity to the table, and their approach to early adoption is different than those that are less dependent on AI today. They're more likely to see generative AI as a pathway to new businesses and or different new sources of revenue. And they point to different models and tools and finding the right models and tools as their top challenges in adoption. By comparison, other respondents suggest that, back to the previous slide, other respondents suggest that reduction in costs through efficiencies is their primary focus. And they cite strategy and vision in finding sufficient resources as their primary challenges. Now we move on to the next slide. What about the impact to the workforce at these organizations? Interestingly, an overwhelming majority of the high performer organizations expect greater than 30% of their workforce will be reskilled over the next 3 years as a result of AI adoption. Less than 10% to be reskilled is expected at the other respondents. Business functions that are expecting the highest amount of decrease in staffing as a result of generative AI adoption include service operations, supply chain management, and HR. However, it's interesting to note that there's still some uncertainty out there in the product and service development as well as the risk areas, which may indicate to me a wait and see approach to how effective the tooling enhancements are before signaling any major shifts. However, I do see that there will be some shifts coming. So finally, let's talk about risks of generative AI. This study indicates very few companies seem to be really fully prepared for managing the risk of implementation and widespread use of generative AI tools. The top risk highlighted by these companies surveyed include inaccuracy, which is a little surprise with all the news around hallucinations and kind of bad results from some of the models, some of the large open models, cybersecurity, and IP infringement. As serious as these risks are, really only around 30% of these companies say that they're mitigating these risks, which is concerning to me, but not surprising given the complexity and the speed of evolution in the generative AI space today. So now, after sharing a little bit of some high-level background and some perspective on early adopters and the adoption of Gen AI at some companies, let's transition into some specific examples and stories. It's my pleasure to welcome back Mr. Frank Moyer, who's CTO of Kobiton, to share his early adopter story with you all. So Frank, let's start out by sharing a bit about your background and experiences in incorporating generative AI at your companies.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, so my journey with AI began actually about 10 years before that one graph on the growth of AI. And it began in the 1980s. It was fall semester of 1988 in New York City when I was a student at Columbia University. And the Professor Stolfo, gave us our first assignment, which was generate a 5x5 crossword puzzle using AI. And you're thinking, that's easy, right? Take like an hour to code and 30 seconds to run. But at the time, computing power isn't near what it is today. So I fortunately had a job at the general counsel's office. So I didn't have to sit in the lab with all the other students. I had my own area to work off of. And I armed myself with a student's diet of a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and a jar of jelly, and locked myself in the general counsel's office for the weekend. I would code in Lisp, let it run for 3 hours, set an alarm to wake up, and then I would check its progress. And it was painstaking. Fortunately, by Sunday, I had a 4x4 crossword puzzle working. And fortunately, as a student of Columbia, we had 1 hour of compute time on Princeton's Cray supercomputer. That meant that I could get from my 4x4 to my 5x5, and it ran very quickly in the supercomputer. And at the time, what made the difference, and the reason I aced that project, was because I had access. I had access to a supercomputer. Now, fast forward to something, what you talked about in 2015, what's happening? 2015, cloud computing is commonplace. We have Google open sourcing TensorFlow, their machine learning library, and PyTorch is coming on the scene as an alternative to TensorFlow. I'm in the middle of a startup for a company called Wingman, and I hired KMS to help me build the Wingman app. And the problem Wingman was solving was when you are at a conference and you are meeting someone, you're either sharing a business card or scanning their lanyard with their name and company. We are providing real-time information about that individual. What does that person and I have in common? What do we have in common? And give me social links in real time. So within 2 seconds, that was our goal. And the KMS team delivered. We were getting 80% accuracy when that was built. And then what happens? In May of 2018, Google announces that they're going to put machine learning onto the mobile device with Google Vision. And I remember being in Grand Canyon with my family and on a call with the KMS team saying, guys, this is it. This is how we get from 80% to 96% plus. And within a month, we had our app out there with Google Vision running on the mobile, in our mobile app. And now we enter this new phase where at Kobiton, also leveraging KMS to help us use artificial intelligence, and we've been building AI into Kobiton for the past 4 years. And over the past 6 months, we've turned from not just building it into our product, right? But we're using it to build our product better. We're using it in the software development lifecycle. And this has been a very exhilarating journey for me, having started 35 years ago with artificial intelligence and where we are today. Today, right now, Jeff, is the most exciting time for me.
Yeah,
Through that journey, we are in such a great place to be alive.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. So what kind of tools and technologies are you guys exploring, and what would you recommend others to explore?
Yeah. So Addie mentioned that we'll provide a list I'm going to provide a list of tools that I've used and come across, everything from video processing to image generation to text. And so I'll provide those tools. But aside from the tools, I want to talk about the mindset. right? This is as much about tools as a mindset. And think of generative AI as a great colleague that's by your side 7 by 24. A friend. All the people at Kobiton refer to it as my friend. That elevates the quality and the efficiency of your work. It has the entirety of the internet at its fingertips. You missed a critical consideration in a document you're creating, she's got you covered. Somebody mentioned something in a meeting and you're like, what does that mean? She lets you know, and she's not judgmental. And most importantly, she's not biased. If you were to ask a colleague, for example, I've got to store some data somewhere. How should I store this data? They might say, use Postgres. Why? Because they're a Postgres database administrator. And so now you get an unbiased view of what the options are and the pros and cons of those options. But I want to get really practical on the extreme ways that I use it in my work product. And I'm going to give you one example. Like, I use it to build better UI design and user experiences at Kobiton. You're like, how? Generally, generative AI is used for text. How do you use it for UI design? Well, I use it because I type in and describe what the user experience of the screen looks like. And I ask questions. How could I make this better? What information am I missing? How would you adjust the UI for a better user experience? And you talk about some of the risks, and it's that you cited, Jeff, and it was, the inaccuracy. Well, part of our job as humans, machines are great. They got vast indexes of knowledge, and it can do the heavy lifting. But we as humans have this ability to reason and a depth of experience to make nuanced decisions and evaluate the feedback from the machines. So it becomes this collaboration, not competition. I saw this great quote, that AI is not going to take our jobs. AI is going to take the jobs of those who don't leverage AI. So my one ask, Jeff, of all the attendees for the webinar today is the next specific task you do for work after this webinar. We've got about 40 minutes left. At the next task, figure out how you can make that task better by leveraging generative AI. I'll be really specific. Just use ChatGPT. And how can you make it better? And that's going to lead into an overall paradigm shift, a mindset shift for you as an individual. And maybe it spreads to others in your organization around how you deliver a better work product.
No, absolutely. I can safely say I used it just before this session and last night, and it's a daily part of, I love your collaboration, not competition. I think that's a key term. And it is very important to validate the end result. Don't just blindly trust what you're getting. Make sure that it is reasonable and makes sense for the context. So awesome. So you are excited about using generative AI. Obviously, you can see it you can hear it in your voice and see it in your face. How do you create that culture of buy-in for generative AI and within your teams? And how do you go about training them to be effective users?
Yeah, so what we're going through right now is a technological tide reshaping at the very core of businesses. Everything we do, everything businesses do. And you have businesses that are emerging, leveraging generative AI and creating new business models. But for the 98% of the world, 99% of the world, it's reshaping our opportunity and how we deliver, how we change our work process. And what I noticed early on at Kobiton was there were 3 types of employees with this tide reshaping. The first, you had the pros, the ones who were like surfing the wave. This is how I'm going to do things going forward. And they were all in. You had the ones who were paddling cautiously, making sure that they were, should I use this? How should I use it? And then you had the skeptics, the ones who were afraid of getting just swept away by this technology. And this is, I think this is common in technology in general, Jeff, like that there are pioneers, the cautious and the skeptics, but generative AI is different for businesses. And it's different than the emergence of the internet. It's different than the emergence of mobile. It's different than the emergence of cloud computing. And the reason is, for those other three, and for a lot of technology, businesses have a overarching position about how do we leverage the internet? How do we leverage mobile? How do we leverage, do we build a mobile app? Do we have a website? For generative AI, it is at the individual employee level that impacts the overall business. And it's the sum of those parts that has the significant impact on giving you a competitive advantage. And what we've done at Kobiton is really spot where people are on that journey. Are they surfing like the pros? Are they paddling? Or are they pushing back? And what we've done is we celebrate the pioneers. So we use their examples as beacons of success and laud what they've done. For the cautious, we nudge them, right? We're like, in meetings, I'll say, hey, have you asked our friend what he thinks or what she thinks? And then for the skeptics, those are the ones who require our utmost attention and empathy. Because, Jeff, they're scared. A lot of people are scared right now. And it's our jobs as leaders to help them get through that fear. And just on the last point of this and how we've, to answer your question, it's not just about employees, it's also about people we're hiring. We've changed how we interview people to make sure that when they come on board, they're embracing this technology, that they're not going to be the skeptics, because the more pioneers we have, the faster we change, the faster we adjust, the faster we out navigate our competition. So it's about a variety of things that we do to embrace this in our culture.
No, that's great. Two real quick stories to share just to kind of parallel that.
Yeah.
I travel to Vietnam and Mexico a lot for work to visit our teams, and one of my earlier trips this year was in the early stages of the rollout of generative AI and ChatGPT specifically, and I got labeled the nickname Jeff GPT because every meeting I would go with every department that I would talk to, I would say, "How are you using ChatGPT? Have you used it yet? What have you done with it?" And everybody had, it was just asking the question, and they knew that the next time I was there, they needed to have a story. So it kind of forced them to try to use it. Another example that helped us, and you talk about celebrating successes, we had a very challenging problem with a client that we were stuck on the solution, and we said, why don't we crowdsource the solution and see if they can use ChatGPT or generative AI in some way. Didn't put any barriers on it, said come up with a solution, and we had a massive like cash prize and gift for the winner, and we had very good participation in it and some very creative ideas, and that just got people playing with it and more comfortable with it. So I think it's a great approach. So you guys have been, I would consider you guys more of a kind of advanced company in terms of your use of AI today and your comfort level in getting into generative AI. Definitely early adopter, which is why we wanted to talk to you today. What's been your biggest takeaway regarding early adoption of generative AI in software development today, and within your company, and kind of what you're seeing, because you're tapped into the industry too. What are you seeing industry wide?
Yeah, so I remember the weekend in January of this year where I spent the whole weekend like, here's how we're going to change our mindset at Kobiton. And it was, I work closely with KMS because, we work closely together. You're our delivery arm. Mm-hmm. And, the only way we as a company can be successful is if KMS, embraced it. And I know that the team there are a lot of great pioneers like in the KMS team that have helped us along to make this happen. And so specifically around the software development lifecycle, I think of it as like this giant puzzle, and all these processes of people putting the puzzle together. How we do that efficiently and with high quality makes all the difference in how we beat our competitors. And what it's important to do is put a little AI magic throughout that software development lifecycle, and constantly ask that question: how can this specific function I'm doing, and I'm not talking broad strokes about testing or development, I'm talking about specific, how do I unit test? How do I load test? Every part of the software development lifecycle, how can we make it better? And the age-old wisdom of delegation comes in play. Like, how can I delegate to my friend and let them help me do more?
Yeah.
With KMS, we early on, I think, we talked probably back in February, March, where I put that seminal slide deck together that said, "Team, let's get our feet wet." And we started with unit testing. It was an easy one to do. We had low unit test, not where we wanted to be, and so we made it all right, everybody, before you do a pull request, make sure that you have generated unit tests. And we've had great success with that so far, but it's about reassessing our job responsibilities. We're shifting now from coders to editors, from testers to editors, and the more we can do to delegate and edit so that we have accuracy, the faster we're able to deliver work product. My nugget of advice is to dive in to those AI waters, but with a keen eye on the horizon, because things change every day.
Yeah.
So you have to, like, a good example, Jeff, is Copilot, right? Copilot's was such a big thing. And I say was because there's a new kid on the block, Cursor, that is a lot better than Copilot. So we're now working with the KMS team to trial it out and see its results compared to Copilot. So you always have to assess the process, the tools, and the technology, because it's going to be a wild technological wave that we're riding right now.
No, very, very true. Two observations. I was in Vietnam when we did the workshops to introduce the technology to the teams and everything, and it was fun to see light bulbs go off in the room as they're seeing the prompts, and they're saying, "Here's a prompt, put it in and do it." And they're like, "Oh, wow, that saved me an hour. That saved me 2 hours.
Yeah.
That saved me 3 hours." And it was less scary because they saw the benefit directly to them. It wasn't they're reading the stories, they're actually playing with it. So getting hands-on is key to reducing the fear of adoption. So that, I think, to me was a huge takeaway. The other is the fact that with the prompt engineering, specifically ChatGPT, you can ask it the same question multiple times and get different responses, which means, more importantly, validating and editing is key, and making sure that you validate the results afterwards. So
there's a whole, a lot of R&D going on right now, and that you can, a lot of these generative AI models, you adjust something called temperature, and the temperature is your willingness of generative AI to change the result. So the higher the temperature and the lower the temperature to change the variability of the response. It's pretty common in all of generative AI models, whether it's image processing or video processing or text processing. to provide temperature as a way to adjust that.
Adjust, yeah. Oh, very good. So wrapping this up, I think this is our final question before we get into the audience Q&As. Crystal ball, Frank the Sarnak, the magician, the whole Johnny Carson thing. Predict the future. What do you think the future of, what are the things coming up in the near future for generative AI and things maybe for Kobiton?
Yeah, Jeff, I love future casting. I think one of my challenges with future casting and generative AI is I'll future cast something and it's like a week later, it's live. So it's sort of like, it's still future casting, right? So I'm going to I look back to my from my journey back at Columbia in the 1980s and to now, and a lot of the milestones have been marked by accessibility, access to compute power, data, machine learning models. And I feel like the future is also going to be marked by access. And I'll give you a short-term prediction, and I'll paint a very vivid picture of what I think is going to happen over the next 6 months. And then I'll paint a little bit longer-term vision, which is probably 6 months and a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's what is possible today. And so this is not future casting. This is what's today. And then I'm going to tag onto this what I think is in the not too distant future. Imagine yourself, Jeff, on a call with one of your customers, let's say Coca-Cola, and you're talking to Susan. And while Susan is speaking, AI is converting what Susan says to text and feeds that text in real time to a prompt, a predefined prompt, that once she finishes, within under a second, you get a set of bullet points on how to best respond to Susan. And now imagine, so NVIDIA came out with a product in January of this year called Eye Contact. And with Eye Contact, I can be reading the prompt or the results, what's called the completion from generative AI and the bullet points, this screen, but it's changing my eyes to engage directly in the camera. Susan thinks that I'm very engaged with her while I'm actually reading the completion from generative AI. That's available today. Okay. Yeah. Now, the problem with that, in my perspective, is I wouldn't use it, right? Well, I wouldn't use it because it's not personalized. It's not using my voice. It's decent, right? It's going to give me, it might give me some ideas, but it may not be how I think or how I say things. And I think in the not too distant future, we're going to have customized training models based on our own personalized training data, where I can take the content, for example, of this webinar, of gong calls that are recorded, of all of that, and feed that in my own personalized generative AI that would provide to Susan, so that it's your voice, it's not my voice. Yeah. So that's in the not too distant future. I think taking that a little bit further out, the next phase is miniaturization, right? Like, how do we take the inference engines that run on these big backend systems, and back to what happened with Wingman, where, Jeff, we took AI and we put deep learning inference engines on the mobile device, and now we can put generative AI inference engines at a reasonable size on, and I think Apple's doing a lot in this regard, and with iOS 17 that Kobiton's been working on to allow that inference in real time. So now I'm out in a social setting and I've got glasses on, and it's feeding prompts for me to make sure that I use the right words in the right moments. So right now, we are living in the most exciting of times, and it's I encourage everyone to embrace and enjoy every minute of what's happening in this exciting world.
Yeah. No, very, very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, we are to that point now, Addie. Do we have any questions from the group?
Yes, we do. Just before we jump into Q&A, I'm launching the final poll now, asking the audience what are you most interested in learning about generative AI? If you could take a moment to respond, this will help us better tailor our content to you and what you're looking for. And we also had a few questions about the data set from the initial slides that Jeff posted. So I am adding the link to the report in the chat. You can feel free to check that out and kind of discover that data and the interpretations that McKinsey had as well.
Yeah.
But now for the audience questions. If you have not submitted yet, you still have time, so feel free to go ahead and do that. But we did have a question come in. So this says, we have implemented a corporate policy to define how AI should be used, being mindful of GDPR issues. Do you see content being hosted in the US being a limiting factor? And this is specifically related to ChatGPT.
Yeah, so I get very inspired by AI and generative AI, and there are a lot of considerations around privacy. Now, you have to adhere to your company's policy. There was, I think, if you look back to the dawn of the internet, there were a lot of policies around internet usage when the internet was emerging. You can't use it during work hours. Does anyone remember that? Like, probably not you, Addie, because you were probably like a little bit, but there were periods where companies were like, you can't use the internet because they thought it was taking away from your work productivity. With licensed versions of ChatGPT, if you look at their terms, that what you provide, what you post into your prompt, Jeff talked about prompt engineering, what you put in there is cannot be shared according to the latest ChatGPT terms and conditions. Now, that you always have to adhere to your company's policies, that sort of overrides whatever the terms and conditions, but I would encourage you to make sure that your company and the attorneys have reviewed all of the terms and conditions of tools like for Midjourney for images and text using something like ChatGPT.
Awesome. No, thank you for that, Frank. We have a few more questions that have come in. So another one here. Do you expect different roles within software development to get different levels of benefits from generative AI? And which roles are impacted the most and the least?
This is an awesome question. So I talk about that first week in January where I wrote that seminal, here's how we're going to leverage generative AI at Kobiton. Not too further out after we had some experience with it, I wrote another paper internally, and I talk about two types of workers in the software development lifecycle. I talk about innovation workers and actualization workers. So innovation workers are doing the true hard R&D, and they're going to get negligible benefit out of generative AI because, on the Kobiton side, if you start asking questions, how do I pair my iOS 17 device, right, which just is coming out in about a month, with Mac OS, it's not going to know. It doesn't have that information, and you're really at the innovation workers are at the forefront of technology, and the ChatGPT is not going to have that indexed. But really, if you think about any business, innovation workers are probably 10 to 20% of what gets delivered of the employee base. The actualization workers are where you're going to get the greatest benefit, right? So people who are designing systems, building the user interface design, writing the actualization code. Like, how do I render this screen? And there you can expect, and I think the research has been done recently that shows it's about a 1.79 productivity factor. We're seeing a little bit more than that at Kobiton for that actualization worker. But I think it's a really good observation, whoever asked that question, that, this is the way to think about it. Like, it's not going to apply to every role within the software development lifecycle. And it's important to know where its strengths are and where its limitations are.
One thing, if I could add to that a little bit, I think I think you're right. There's the senior level developers that have been there, done that, and specifically just the engineering side. They know a lot of the patterns already, and they've built up a lot of collateral that they use to be effective in their job. Junior developers just coming up, their time frame to get to a senior level of knowledge and experience or capability is going to be shrunk, because they have access to all of that, and they have access to that knowledge very quickly, right? So their ability to raise up to a higher level of productivity is quicker than it is for a senior level that's already operating at that level. So I think that translates well to other roles as well, from a business analyst or UI designer or security analyst or architect. It's just the degree at which it will lift your capabilities up to a higher productivity.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jeff. And sort of that the benefit from the junior, if I could just play that back, the benefit from the junior developer is learning faster, because if you're willing to engage in the conversation with your friend, you get the learning. On the senior side, you get a lot of productivity because you're taking out some of the rote work, right? Like, I just have to generate this function and it goes really quickly.
Awesome. No, we have another question that came in from the audience. Do you have any use cases that come to mind in implementation and customer success?
Yeah, so I've given a few already. How we work with KMS on unit testing. That's been a huge success so far. We're getting a 15% reduction in the number of bugs we find in integration testing as a result of that, and without a loss in productivity. I expect that's going to go up to even higher numbers. I talked about how we use it in our UI design phase, and we're using it also for competitive analysis when we're building new features, right? So now our product managers are leveraging generative AI to say, here's what some of our competitors do. How can we make our feature better, leveraging that knowledge? And so it's hitting every single step, Addie, of our software development lifecycle. And Jeff, I'm sure you've seen similar from other customers at KMS.
Yeah, definitely similar results. We're experimenting and watching, creating benchmarking projects to make sure we see and can quantify the benefits from an implementation standpoint of the tools in the life cycle. One of the use cases that we're experimenting with in our R&D group is the creation of those custom small models that, with embedding, that you can embed your own personal information or your own, to the point of, you can create your voice versus the open source voice, right? And from a customer success standpoint, it's accessing your Jira tickets, your customer responses, your, the interactions you've had with customers in the past. And as you bring somebody new into a customer success or a customer facing role, they can have more of a consistent response that's aligned with the way your company has interacted with your clients, rather than having to create that from scratch and learn it from scratch. So again, it accelerates bringing new people into a team, and to keep consistency in how you interact with your customers.
Oh, awesome. And we've got some more questions coming in. So how do you measure the effectiveness of generative AI usage within your organization? Do you track and quantify, for example, gains in productivity, frequency of use, quality against different use cases?
Yeah, so it's still early days. I wish I had the perfect answer here. We are measuring commit to completion ratios in story points. So that's the key measurement that we're using right now. Longer term, it's going to be about, how do we outmaneuver and outpace our competition in terms of feature delivery. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Oh, I think you're right on the money. I think looking at story points and again, story points don't translate well across other companies and other teams, but within one team, you can benchmark and see an improvement over their productivity prior to introducing the tools and then post introducing the tools. And you can do that by role. We look closely at our quality measures, quality of the product, defects found or defects avoided. And yeah, it's long term, it's going to be overall reduction of time and the efficiencies we can get for our clients and getting their features out to market faster. So it's for us, it's going to be retention of business too, because we want to continue to be that partner that they trust to go faster and better and build their products better, like you mentioned before.
I can imagine, Jeff, from a KMS perspective, this is such a huge opportunity that, it's every company, every startup or, KMS is big. Accenture's bigger. If you're looking at taking a competitive advantage over Accenture, being specialists in generative AI and how to leverage this really gives you would give KMS a really a key competitive differentiator against Accenture.
Well, and the introduction of generative AI assisted services or capabilities is something we are exploring and introducing and with the intent that we can do things faster, better, cheaper, and more repeated, more in a repetitive manner across a variety of clients. So it is about additional revenue, additional dollars. I consider myself in more of that advanced group. We got a very high degree of comfort with AI, and throughout all that we do, and we want to use generative AI to create new revenue sources and to create new business. And that's going to be good for us, but it's, ultimately the best for our clients because they're going to see the improved productivity, improved time to, reduce time to market and better quality.
Yeah, that's awesome. We just had a great question come in. With the rise of AI in software development, how can developers ensure they remain relevant and continue to add value?
Great. Software development is here for the long haul. It's I think the quote I used earlier was, if AI isn't going to take your job, AI is going to take the jobs of those who don't leverage AI. So become, the phrase 10xer is cliche at this point, but become a 10xer, leverage AI and leverage the tooling, be current, and leverage it in a way that demonstrates that, back to Jeff's points about productivity, that you can demonstrate your productivity as an individual contributor to the software development product, demonstrate how much more productive you are by leveraging this technology, and own it. Be the leader, be the pioneer, and that's how you stay relevant.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that the technology, while it's advancing, it's not to a point where it can replace the building of a very complex, intricate networked system. right? It can build bits and pieces and help you to build the Lego bricks that you need to build the whole system. But putting the system together still requires a lot of engineering oversight and talent and thought. And that, down the road maybe becomes more and more something that the technology can do. But today it's how do you leverage it to put the things together rather than building each of the little bitty bits.
Yeah, the phrase autonomous testing emerged 5 years ago, and I'm like, there's still a lot of domain knowledge needed to perform true testing. AI can help with checking, right? It does great, and we use it at Kobiton in our product to help our customers identify, for example, visual differences from one release to another, which is really hard for a human to do if you're thinking about like a button that shifts by 5 pixels. That's easily missed. That's where AI shines. But knowing the domain and having expertise in the domain, specifically around quality assurance, we are, like Jeff said, we are years away from true autonomous testing. And there will always be domain experts to make sure it does the right thing.
Great. You touched on this a bit, but this is a question specific to testing. Where do you see generative AI benefiting the testing and quality assurance space?
Everywhere. So if we look at what we do at Kobiton, specifically around mobile testing, we leverage AI we use deep learning models. We don't as much use generative AI, but we use deep learning models, which is a subset of AI, to identify visual differences from a release to release, is one example. We use it to check for accessibility issues. So we check every mobile app against the W3C compliance with accessibility. And right now, some of our customers are shifting to us because they're taking rulers and holding up a ruler to a screen and saying, how many pixels is this tap area, in order to do that. We can do that. It's not even AI, it's just simple math in some cases. But we're using it also we're using AI to detect accessibility, and we're using it for other parts of, like, our scriptless automation leverages AI to generate an Appium script from a manual session. We're the only ones in the market who can do that. We're the only ones where a tester can run a manual session, and they don't have the skills, a manual tester, to run automation. We can replicate that process, those steps, using artificial intelligence across a multitude of other devices that are different screen sizes, different resolutions, all using AI. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. And I think as a general concept, the generative AI will help us to be smarter about what you test and when you test and how you test. It's not always about building out more and more and more tests and running more and more automation and doing it faster. I think it's being smarter about what and how and why, because cycle times on the cloud are expensive, and you don't want to just run them in unlimited amounts. So that, I think, is an area that is to be tapped, but it will be.
Great. And then we have another question came in about, how do you see copyright and IP issues affecting the use of generative AI generated code in commercial software development?
Yeesh. Yeah. So, if you look at the current position, this is an ever-changing topic. I go back to innovation work versus actualization work. And the position we're taking at Kobiton is to do a risk-based approach, right? If you're we've identified 5 areas that are key intellectual property differentiators from our competitors. And we've told our development team that's off limits. Don't go near generative AI for that part. That's our innovation work. For the actualization work, like SSO integration, it is so commonplace. It doesn't give us competitive advantage. We always have a license agreement, right? So we have licensed copies of ChatGPT and Copilot so that we're protected in that regard. But we're also using it for the lower risk areas in our product.
No, that's great. I think we're running up on time, so we have a minute for one more question. If we didn't get to your question, we will do our best to respond after the webinar if you did not submit anonymously. But for the last question, let's do this one. With AI becoming a significant part of the software development lifecycle, how should companies approach training and upskilling their development teams?
Jeff, I'm going to let you take this one first.
Yeah, so it's a great. I think it's providing them with access to the tools in a safe way, and it's in sandbox or environments where you're not going to put them at risk or put your company at risk of inadvertently submitting code and it becoming part of the open trained model. I think it's finding some experts that understand prompt engineering and starting there, and getting the team comfortable with using ChatGPT or Bard or any of those to try to finish a task. Ask it to do something and then get better at asking questions and refining. And I think that gets you in the mindset of understanding what the model is capable of and how you get the most out of the model versus one prompt and getting a response and then like, oh, I don't like it. You gotta go back and work with the model and kind of understand how it thinks and how it evolves. And then it's holding the teams accountable to doing the work. One of the things that Kobiton did, which I really respected, is they put in the definition of done for stories, you must, create a unit test script and it must be, generated through ChatGPT to complete this story. That kind of gets everybody in the mindset of, hey, this is part of the job now. We got to do it.
Yeah, and that I'll add on a little bit to what Jeff said. I think you're training on something. You're either training on how to be a better developer or you're training on how to leverage generative AI that, as a byproduct, accelerates the speed at which you become a better developer.
Yeah.
I look at it as the training is through the tooling. It's so easy. It's really so easy. All you have to do is start, and then it just happens.
No, it's a fair point.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jeff and Frank, so much for your presentation, for your responses, and thank you everyone for attending. If you would like to learn more about KMS or Kobiton or any of the topics we've discussed, there will be links in the follow-up for you to reach out. In the meantime, feel free to use the contact forms on our respective websites. We're happy to talk with you, learn about where you need help with generative AI, and see if we can assist there. But other than that, I think that's all we have to discuss today. So thanks again for attending and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.